Hey, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now, this is the world's very first podcast which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming hike, trek or mountain adventure. So once a week, I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for. Let's get into today's episode. Okay, hello guys. Today we are talking about interval training and your rest when you're training as a hiker. Now, specifically what I'm going to be talking about is when you are doing interval training in your hiking training or your hiking preparation, what should you be doing in the rest periods? So when you're actually between intervals, should you be still moving to try and keep the heart rate up, or should you just be resting and recovering, or what else could you be doing in this particular rest period? Now, this is a very specific episode today, but it is talking about a subject which is pretty important in the grand scheme of things. Because as we talked about in this podcast many times, there are a number of types of interval training that can be really beneficial for hikers. Now, as I say, I don't typically recommend typical HIIT sessions that you might find online or a local gym where you just do 45 seconds quick and 15 seconds rest and do a bunch of that. Or you might do Tabata training at 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off and just do a bunch of that. Or any of that type of interval training where the pure focus is just getting you tired and sweaty. Because yeah, that might be fun for some people, but it's not an amazing way of training for hikers, and it's not something I'd really ever recommend unless it's something you particularly love doing. But what I do mean when I'm talking about interval training for hikers are things like stair intervals or hill intervals or the aerobic power intervals that I talk about so much on this podcast, or doing sort of tempo walking, or doing intervals of like 8 minutes at a time on a bike, or 10 minutes at a time, or intervals on the rower or the Stairmaster, or whatever it may be. And I've talked about so many different types of intervals on this podcast, but anything you may be doing in your week. And I'm talking about that when I'm talking about interval training. I want to explore what you should be doing in your rest periods. So if you are doing periods of 8 minutes on, 2 minutes off, what do you do for those 2 minutes? Or if you're doing periods of 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, what are you doing those 2 minutes? Like, what should you be going about? Now, really, when it comes down to this, there's sort of two schools of thoughts which many trainers prescribing interval trainers will lean towards. Now, I'm going to explain both these areas. Some people will have their preferences for some reasons, some people won't, but I'm going to talk you through what I particularly prefer. Now, the two schools of thought is, number one, in your rest period of your interval training, is still to keep on moving moderately quick or lightly in order to keep the heart rate up. So this might look, if you're doing, say, let's say Stairmaster intervals, and you're doing 4 minutes on, 1 minute off, and someone might say, okay, do 4 minutes relatively quick, and then 1 minute, just go moderately quick or lightly and keep on moving because it'll keep your heart rate up. And that's one school of thought. And the idea behind that is, most people, in my opinion, or at least most people prescribing this, they're coming from the point of like, the main aim of the game is heart rate. And they just want to keep your heart rate up high the entire session. And the more you can have your heart rate up higher, the fitter, in quotation marks, you're going to get. There are smarter ways of thinking about that, but I'd say most people prescribing interval training for hikers, that's sort of the justification around that. Now, the second area, and the second school of thought when it comes to these rest periods, is having complete rest and doing absolutely nothing during this period. So if you were doing these 4 minutes on, 1 minute off on a stepper, in that 1 minute, you step off the stepper and you literally just wait, catch your breath, take it easy, and then get back to it at the end of your interval. Now, the idea behind this particular way of just resting is you want to recover as much as you possibly can during this rest period. So by the time you get back to the next working period, you can work a little bit harder and you can work to your best extent. Now, you probably won't recover completely depending on what type of intervals you're doing, but it'll recover as much as you can. And then you can work harder, in the further intervals. And in all honesty, this is the one I lean towards in 99% of the time, is in your rest periods as a hiker during your interval training, is try to recover as much as you can during this time. If you're in the situation where you can have complete rest, so if you're doing Stairmaster work, or say you're doing sessions on a stationary bike or a rower, or anything where you can completely rest for whatever rest period, that's something I strongly recommend. And just completely take it easy, catch your breath as much as you can, then get into it. If you're doing things like stairs or hills outdoors, or if you're doing something like, tempo walks or whatever it is, but you're actually outdoors and still moving, I would say, obviously you can't just stop at the top of a hill, because then you're not going to have any hill to climb, the next interval. So yes, obviously you do need to move down the bottom, but move really slowly. So don't jog down the bottom. Don't keep yourself moving during this period. Walk very slowly down the bottom. Rest as much as you can, and then get back to it as soon as the time comes up. Now, I like this because it lets you work harder in these working interval periods. That's the downright fact. And the more you're recovered, the more harder you can work. And as hikers, we don't really need to stress about heart rate too much, about keeping your heart rate up, burning calories, or whatever it may be. What we're looking for is performance. And I personally think this second option is much better. Now, on top of this, what I absolutely love to do with my hikers as well is in this period of rest, when you're doing absolutely nothing, whether it's a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever you're doing, is to use this time not just to catch your breath, but to really try to practice abdominal breathing. Now, I've talked about abdominal breathing on this podcast many times before. And basically, the whole idea of that is it's a really good way of just helping calm the body down, de-stress the body. It can be a really effective way of breathing when you're actually on the trail. And when you're teaching your body to do this in your training, it gets much easier when you're actually on the trail. And essentially what it involves is trying to breathe in through your nose, and as opposed to your chest and shoulders doing all the movement and all the work and they're expanding, you feel your belly expand first. So breathing through the nose, feel the belly expand, belly go in and out, and that's your abdominal breathing. Now, what I like for my hikers is in this rest period to try to ask them to try and concentrate on this particular type of breathing. Now, if you've just done a really hard interval, in the first 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, it's probably going to be impossible to do this perfectly. And you're going to be trying to concentrate on it and you'll be like, oh my gosh, this sucks, but it's really hard. And then after a minute or so, once you have caught your breath, maybe it gets a little bit more doable. But the pure act of practicing this, even if you can't do it particularly, it's going to make it better and better. You're going to get better and better. It's going to get easier and easier. And over time, this is going to help you be able to stick to this type of breathing in tougher sections on the trail, be able to lean on it in different situations. And it can be a really effective way of training. So not only are you working hard during your actual intervals, in your rest periods, you're recovering, but also training the body in this particular way for breathing. And I think that's really effective. So to wrap things up today for the intervals, as a hiker, if you're doing any type of interval training, whether it's stairs, hills, aerobic power, on the bike, on the rower, on the stair machine, or whatever it may be, in your rest periods, I recommend having as much rest as you can, taking as easy as you can, recovering as much as you can, and trying to focus on that abdominal breathing. Personally, I think that's going to give you the best results. I think that's going to be the most beneficial thing for you. And I think if you are sort of worrying about your heart rate, really don't worry. Go the other way, have the rest, because that is going to be the best. As I said, a really specific episode today, but I thought it was a topic worth covering because it is something that can give you those little extra percentages in regards to your training. And over the long term, those little bits and pieces can add up. So thank you very much for listening today, guys. Now, if you were interested in interval training for hiking, if you're curious about any of these sessions I've mentioned, you just were interested in some examples around different interval training workouts you can use as a hiker, or even interested in learning a bit more about the abdominal breathing, I would love if you can come and find me in the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. Inside that group, as I always say, I'm always happy to expand on these episodes, expand on this information, share tutorials, share videos, answer questions, or whatever it may be. So if you want to come find me, it's the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. I'll leave a link in the show notes below. So thank you so much for listening today, guys, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.